All right, I want to get to our speaker today because one of the options that our founders put in to the founding documents was this concept of a convention of states, and it's an interesting concept that a lot of people don't probably know about. But I found a speaker, thanks to Dan for referring Al Torres to us. And I'll introduce Al. Al began his involvement with the Convention of States in 2018 while living in New Braunfels, Texas. Before becoming a state director, he was the district captain for Texas House District 73 and Senate District 25. He attended the University of Puerto Rico and then joined the United States Navy in 1974, where he completed his military obligation in 1980 as an NCO. He served as a radioman and code operator during his time of service, and he was on active duty Naval Communications Station Roosevelt Roads when the United States Navy celebrated its 200th birthday. Then Al continued service to his country for 25 years as an officer with the CIA. He received numerous awards, recognitions during his career with the agency, including the CIA Career Commendation Medal upon his retirement. After leaving the CIA, he founded Paragon Communication Solutions, which he started in 2006. Paragon provided classified communications and information systems technology services and consultations to the intelligence community and Department of Defense. He spent much of his time overseas, including a stint from 2002 to 2012, where he was deployed consistently in support of ongoing operations in the global war on terrorism, often in denied areas in the war zones of Afghanistan and Iraq. When Al sold Paragon in 2016, he and his wife retired to New Braunfels, where they built their home in a place called Vintage Oaks, and he started a Veterans Association. He was very active in politics, joined the New Braunfels Republican Women as an associate member, and later as a full member of the New Braunfels Conservatives. He served as a deputy voter registrar for Precinct 107 and worked the election polls for several years. He's twice attended the Texas GOP State Convention as a delegate and an alternate. Now Al and his wife Rhonda have moved back to Virginia, and they volunteer with the Convention of States national team as an assistant regional director, and he's part of the regional captain team for the Shenandoah region in Virginia. So this is going to be an interesting presentation, and I hope you guys learn a lot today from Al, and I'm going to ask Al to come on up and go for it.
Well, thank you, Josh. I appreciate those kind words. I better get my notes here. Some of that stuff, all that does is indicate that I'm old. When you're in service in the 200th anniversary of the United States Navy, that just tells you you've been around for a little bit longer. And I like the tenets that we saw up here because they align significantly with what Convention of States is all about. I'll tell you a little bit more how I got into this and why I do this and everything once we're done with the presentation itself. It should take about maybe 20 minutes. And so I want to thank you again for the opportunity to be here. And I'm going to discuss Convention of States, what it's all about. Basically, we're going to talk about the problem, the solution, how it works, our strategy, and finally, how you can get involved. And if you're not familiar with Convention of States or Article 5, don't worry about it. When we're done here and my time's completed, hopefully you'll have a good foundation in understanding what Article 5 is about and why a Convention of States is an important thing to help us get our country back on the rails that it's supposed to be, and how you can participate and be part of that. An Article 5 convention is designed to address the three biggest problems stemming from Washington, D.C., and that is the debt and spending crisis, the overreach of the federal government, which I believe you guys are very familiar with, and finally, the detriment of having career politicians. First, let's talk about the debt and spending crisis. The most important fact here is discussing this is that party doesn't matter. It's both Republicans and Democrats who are spending well beyond our needs. Over the past 100 years, the federal debt has increased from $409 billion in 1922 to over $34 trillion today. And just in fiscal years 19 through 21, spending has increased by a rate of over 50% and is continuing to grow today. We're going to continue to feel these effects of this irresponsible spending, but however, our grandchildren will be saddled with an even more burdensome reality than what we face today. Because according to the 2022 Medicare Trustees Report. Medicare Part A will be depleted by the year 2026, which is just around the corner. And Social Security Administration reports that the benefits we are now expected to be payable in full on a timely basis through 2037. That's when the trust fund and the reserves are depleted. It's going to be empty. There won't be anything there for us to do. We'll continue to feel these problems, these effects, as long as the status quo continues. The second problem is government overreach. There are many ways that Washington abuses its power, but one of the most troubling ways that happens every day is in the federal bureaucracies. Most people don't realize that these bureaucrats working for agencies such as the EPA, the FDA, the ATF, the IRS are not elected officials. Yet, the laws and the regulations that we live under come from these unelected officials. And not to mention, there are over 400 federal agencies. And so here's the problem with that. Article 1 of the Constitution says that the legislative power, all legislative power, is vested in Congress, not in unelected bureaucrats. And so this next video I have up here, make sure I work this correctly, shows a good example of how that we've gotten away from that principle. Let's see if we play. Here we go. This here is what Congress passes. This right here are the regulations under which we live that are passed by these unelected bureaucrats. Take a look at that. They're not done yet. But that federal bureaucracy is not the only entity that creates laws out of thin air. The Supreme Court does it as well. Let me see if we get this to play.
People like us, people that are frustrated in Washington, D.C., often say, well, they don't follow the Constitution anyway. Not true. They follow the wrong one. They're following the Constitution as interpreted by the Supreme Court rather than the Constitution as written.
This, taking out of my pocket, is a pocket Constitution. 4,000 words in the original document, 4,400 words. If you count the amendments, we're talking about 7,000 words. But here is the Constitution in force today. This is 3,000 pages of Supreme Court rulings showing what every ruling has done to the original words. This isn't going to get any smaller. In fact, every time they publish this document, they leave a bunch of blank pages at the back for additional rulings that they know are coming. Every page in this document means a grant of power to the federal government. Understand that this is the Constitution in operation today. And unless we change it, unless we make its wording crystal clear, we're going to continue to operate under this document forever and ever until the whole house of cards comes falling down.
Just so you know that really does exist, I have a copy of that Constitution over here with some of the other literature that I have. So we'll take pictures of and add that to your library to educate about our Constitution and what we need to do to save our nation again. Neither the bureaucrats nor Supreme Court justices are elected, which takes power away from the people, and it gives it to entities that are almost never held accountable. Never held accountable for their actions. And speaking of unaccountable officials, we have them up here. Our founders never wanted anyone to make a career out of public service. But look how long these men and women from both sides of the aisle have been in Washington, D.C. One of them just recently passed away, still in office. But you might ask yourself, why shouldn't they serve? They were elected by their constituents. So why shouldn't they keep serving when they get reelected and reelected? Well, the problem with that is they start smelling like that swamp we've heard so much about, right? The more they become tied to the bureaucracies and special interests, the more they are willing to sacrifice what they do for their constituents and, more importantly, for this nation. They won't stick their neck out for us. They won't stick their necks out to save this nation. And as you can see, the problem's only getting worse. Take a look at this most recent congressional reelection rate. One of the core beliefs of Convention of States is that the federal government will never fix itself. Let me repeat that. The federal government will never fix itself. Our federal officials, whether they're bureaucrats or Supreme Court justices or members of Congress, don't have any incentive whatsoever to change the status quo. They're all too perfectly happy to continue acquiring more power, more wealth and influence, as long as we the people allow them to do that. And a little note I want to take just a second here. Look at that rate. What did we hear for the elections coming up in 2022? A red wave. Something was going to change. We were going to elect the right people to get to Congress. We all heard about it. We all thought it was happening. But look what really happened. 94.5% of the incumbents were reelected in the House and 100% in the Senate. Pretty much the definition of insanity when you keep doing the same thing over and over again and expect a different result. But fortunately, or unfortunately, the founders of this country thought about that and they knew that this would happen. So what's our solution? That's what we're going to talk about next.
The 15th of September, 2 days before they signed the document, the end of 4 long, hot months in Philadelphia, they were ready to go home. But George Mason noticed that Article 5 only had a single method for amending the Constitution. He said, wait a minute, what if Congress becomes an obstacle?
It was given to us by George Mason, who said, look at guys, someday this government's going to abuse its power, and there won't be anything for you ever to ratify if it's counting on Congress to reduce the power of the federal government. So we need to give the states the ability to reduce the power of the federal government.
Let's not lose sight of the fact that it was a Virginian who put in Article 5 of the Constitution, George Mason. So what does Article 5 actually say? The Congress, whenever 2/3 of both houses shall deem it necessary, shall propose amendments to this Constitution. Here's the key word, or on the application of the legislatures of 2/3 of the several states shall call a convention for proposing amendments. That right there is the essence of Article 5. We're allowing the state legislatures to call a convention for the purpose of proposing amendments, just like Congress has done, just like they have the power to do, and how they've done it 27 times. The convention can only be called if 2/3 of the states, today that would be 34 states, pass a resolution calling for such a convention. Note the word proposing. An Article 5 convention is a meeting of the states in which they discuss potential amendments to the United States Constitution. Those amendments serve, as Article 5 says, must then be sent back to the states for ratification, and it takes 38 states' legislatures to do that. It's a very high bar, but it ensures that only the very best amendments will finally be adopted into our Constitution, our founding document. So what's our plan of action? It's pretty simple. We believe, let me back it up one, we believe that Article 5, as the founders intended, is what we're going to use. We believe the federal government has gone off the rails, and we want the states to use their power under Article 5 to get our nation back on track. We don't want to do things and tear everything apart. Just like in the War for Independence, our desire isn't to scrap everything, but we want to start something, and we don't want to start something brand new, but we want to get back to the founding principles of this country. And Article 5, we believe, is the best and most effective way to make this happen. So how's it work? Let's take a closer look at this process itself. It's we the people that lead. Our citizens asked their state legislators to pass a resolution calling for Article 5 convention. Millions of patriots across the United States have done this already. They've done it by signing our petition, and thousands more have encouraged their state legislators by calling them, writing to them, or visiting with them, telling them and encouraging them to sign on to have a convention of the states. Next, the process, the Convention of States resolution follows the same process as any other resolution. It must pass committees in all chambers and finally pass the full chamber in the House and the Senate. Once 34 states have passed this resolution calling for an Article 5 convention, Congress is obligated. They don't have any other choice. They are obligated under Article 5 to name a time and place for this convention. The state legislatures, they decide who the commissioners are they want to send to this convention and how many they want to send. But each state only gets one vote. Some of you may know that we just recently sponsored a second. The first one was in 2016, and just recently, August of 23, Convention of States held a simulated Convention of States in Williamsburg. I was fortunate enough to be one of the only grassroots member to be there in attendance to represent the many volunteers across the nation, and it was a hell of a good experience. I got to tell you, those people worked hard to make it happen. And in your pamphlets I gave you there is actually a copy of the resolutions that in the short time they were there, they were able to come up with, and they were addressing, like we said here, the debt and spending crisis, term limits, and the overreach of the federal government. Once 34 states have had this, did I read that slide? Okay, so amendments at the convention. Amendments at the convention, that the commissioners at the convention will debate and vote on amendments. And the details of that a little bit later on here, but it's important to know that all amendments proposed must be limited to the language of the resolution itself, and any off-topic amendment will be considered out of order. Amendment proposals are passed at the convention when a simple majority of the states attending vote for them. In one state, one vote. Next, the amendment proposals are passed out of convention and sent back to the states for ratification. It takes 38 states to vote yes for any amendment proposal to become part of the Constitution. And again, this is a very high bar. It all but eliminates the possibility of any bad amendment being instituted into our Constitution. Think of it this way. It only takes one chamber in 13 states to not allow any proposed amendment to move forward. And finally, once any proposed amendment has been ratified by the requisite 38 states, it is automatically amended to our Constitution and officially adopted. So, what's our strategy? It's very simple. It's twofold. It's the legislative side and the grassroots. On the legislative side, we're seeking to pass the Convention of States resolution in at least 34 states, and we've already passed it in 19, which means we're a little bit over halfway there. And as closer we get, the harder we're being attacked on what we're trying to do here. Our resolution calls for amendments in 3 distinct categories, as I've already said. First, impose fiscal restraints on the federal government. Second, limit the power and jurisdiction of that federal government. And finally, impose term limits on its officials and members of Congress. Remember, like I said before, when the states call for an Article 5 convention under this resolution, they can only propose amendments that fall into one of these 3 categories. Convention of States does not endorse any particular amendment. We rather would have the states propose and discuss and pass out amendments from this convention. Now here's where you come in. Along with lobbying the state legislatures, we're seeking to build the nation's largest grassroots army, and as you can see, we're well on our way. We have grassroots activists and supporters in 7,000 386 state legislative districts, and at the head of each one are grassroots leadership, district captains. They're actively recruiting more. Our grassroots activists are the heartbeat of this organization, and in large part, the momentum that is building the Convention of States movement across the country is because of them. With over 5 million supporters across the nation, Convention of States is on its way to making a historic Article 5 convention happen. The Trafalgar Group has conducted bipartisan polling nationally, and the good news is that over 60% of registered voters say they would support their state calling for an Article 5 convention. One of the most exciting aspects here is that it enjoys bipartisan support. Over 50% of Democrats and over 75% of Republicans say they would back an Article 5 convention to limit the power and jurisdiction of the federal government. Some of the most prominent thinkers across the United States have noticed this and are backing the Convention of States' sponsorship, as you can see some of them up here today. Normally in another presentation, I can click on any one of these faces here to give you a little bit of a comment on what they actually say. So now, as you're familiar with, here's the sales pitch, right? In conclusion, get involved. If you'd like to get involved, we have many volunteer activists and leadership positions available in your community. And if you're interested in other opportunities, please don't hesitate to go to our website, conventionofstates.com, and look at the information there. But for today, here's 3 great ways you can join the movement. First, QR code right up here. You can sign, and you should do this, sign the petition calling for a Convention of States, or you can go to conventionofstates.com and do it online. conventionofstates.com and go online to do this. And when you provide your full address, a copy of your petition, signed petition, goes to your representative and shows them that you support them in calling and supporting a call for an Article 5 Convention of the States. Secondly, it's the district captains that we talked about before, and here's a short video on what that position is like.
District captains form the backbone of the Convention of States movement, fulfilling our vision of a citizen network that restores self-governance in America. As a district captain, you will help recruit, welcome, and educate other volunteers in your local area. You may also inform in-district volunteers when they can have their voices heard at committee hearings at their state capital. COS provides cutting-edge training and connects you with patriots who have been exactly where you are starting. So get on the front lines of the movement to reclaim liberty. Apply today at conventionofstates.com.
Finally, by joining, I want to point out here, there are other positions out here that you can help with. You don't necessarily be a district captain and move on to these rights. There's many talents as you've used here in your business days that you can help out with there. Not a lot of people will be comfortable speaking in front of a group or doing anything like that. I certainly wasn't, and I do this because I volunteer and I believe in what I'm doing here. And as you can see, since I didn't get paid today, my amateur status stays intact. But there's several positions out here that you can apply for and do that. Legislative liaison folks, we have people that write, social media warriors that get out there, a whole host of different positions that you can be with. And by joining Article 5 today, there's one more thing you can do. Your financial support is support that will allow us to recruit, train, and deploy more activists into the largest liberty-minded grassroots army in America. With your support, we can rein in Washington, D.C. and transfer the power and decision-making to the sovereign citizens of the United States as we return our nation to the principles of self-governance. If you'd like to make a positive impact on our movement by contributing today, you can do so by scanning this QR code or go to conventionofstates.com/donate. And that's going to be it as far as this presentation
I will not tolerate that we can do nothing. And every time you bring it to me, I will mercilessly crush it. Here are the 2 options. Use the freedom you have to do something, or you're going to have to fight for the freedom you have. There's nothing in between. There is no in between. Nothing in between. When it comes to a Convention of States, I would much rather fight it out of who is truly the most committed and the most organized than trying to take on a grander scale, their media and all the messaging machine and everything else. And I love this idea that the Convention of States is so radical. What's it Article 5 of? Do you guys know?
Constitution.
The U.S. Constitution. Who wrote that?
Founding Fathers.
Founding Fathers did. So who wrote the Convention of States? There's a mechanism here that we don't have to keep doing this. We can create something that just completely goes around these people. I have no tolerance, none, no patience, none, for there's nothing we can do. Elections don't matter, nothing matters. Then lock and load. You don't really believe in your own futility. Cultures of losing have to be confronted head on. Losing is a disease. We're infected with it. There's too much money to be made from it. Makes us feel comfortable. It lines up with our pessimistic eschatology, which we then use as an excuse to not do a damn thing. Is this not America? What the hell, man? Get over ourselves. Win. Get off your ass and win. Stop being losers. We're winners. Act like it.
I realized that was loaded right there,
I
but
will not tolerate that we can do nothing.
I love Steve Deese. He's fireball. I've seen him in a couple of our conventions speaking, and he is a fireball. In fact, I've got a copy of one of his books over there, The Faucian Bargain. If you've not read that one, I encourage you to do so. In fact, take a picture of some of those things I've got over there. They're good to do that. One thing before I open up for a Q&A like this here, I noticed, and I think we do have federal veterans in the room. Is that correct? I want to thank you for your service as well, brothers. Thank you. So I'll let you do the Q&A first, and then I will speak a little bit more about why I actually do this and what's behind my motivation behind this, and leave you with that for a little bit. I know you probably have to go to work. Y'all got me up early, so my time is yours here. Are there any questions right now? Yes, sir.
Can you give the status of the Commonwealth of Virginia with the Convention of States?
Absolutely. You're going to put that right here. To me, it's a little mind-boggling. I did move from here, as you heard in my bio. Left here once I sold my company, moved out to Texas. That's where I planned to live out the rest of my days, but family has called us back here to Virginia. I followed Virginia out there for a while, especially what was happening, school boards, the elections here, what was going on in Loudoun County, and imagine my surprise when I saw what happened there. The county itself remained blue, right? Much everything happened there. But what happened here in Loudoun County started a movement around the country, school boards and everything else, right? Virginia has not signed up to be one of the states that is calling for a convention of states. And I find that amazing because as you look through history, everything that started where we are today originated here, right? People are afraid to take this next step. I would ask you a question. Those of you that started your own company like I did, and if I'd known better, I probably never would have taken that step, but did you take a step into doing something that was hard to do? Did you do that with confidence in yourself and knowing that you believe that you could do something and make a change happen and build your business? That's what I did. I did it there, and I do it here with Convention of States. So one of the things that's happening here in Virginia is they're working hard. The team here in Virginia is working extremely hard to try to get it passed. Now, they've recently lost both houses in the election. So this year, the plan for the Virginia team is to work on passing two different resolutions. There are accompanying resolutions that go with an Article 5, and that is a faithful delegate, and the other one is a little, punishment if you don't if you don't act as a faithful government delegate as you should be when you go to convention. In other words, you vote the way you're supposed to, and you deal with these. You don't bring an article to be debated that's out of line with the three tenets that we have here. So that's what we're going to do here this year. Because of the change, we now have to educate the new members of the Senate and Congress, and on the House side, what Convention of States is all about. But I'll tell you this, the good news is just recently, this past month, the state of Virginia, their team won State of the Year because of what they've done. But to give you a little bit of example, excuse me, let me show you, I brought this here just so I could read it and let you see what Virginia has done. Leading up to the elections here, they work hard, because one of the things that we do with Convention of States is the goal, obviously, is to get convention. But our mission is to bring a different type of awakening to the American people. One that says, stand up for our country, get back to our principles. And that's what we do. And so what we do with the states that have passed the resolution and those that are getting here, trying to get there, are focused on getting that resolution. But when it's done, what do? Do we just let them hang in there? It happened for a while, but we change that, and that's what I do. I work with the states that have already passed. So what we do is we teach people how to work with their legislators, how to speak to them, how to contact them, and how to support legislation that aligns itself with what our principles are. And we ask them to go there. So yesterday, the Virginia team, as many people as could, were down in Richmond for opening session. They're there to meet the representatives, to talk to them, to greet them, to wish them well, and look for their support in passing the Convention of States resolution, right? So here's an idea, here's a little bit of what they did. They invited all the candidates, the pro-COS candidates, for successful support in supporting their primaries. We use the tools that are available to make this happen. We did block walking, telepatriot calling, the COS get out the vote texting, email blasts, yard signs, polling place manning, and permitted signages. By election day, the state team had reached 61,501 voters. 3,666 doors had been knocked on by the block walking teams, 7,417 telepatriot calls had been made, and over 35,000 get out the vote person-to-person text had been sent. And then when the voting was done, 8 pro-COS candidates supported by our teams were elected. So it's not about just getting this done. We expect everybody to get involved and do this thing. As I told Josh, I don't do this because I have nothing to do with my time. I do this because this is an obligation. All right, it's an obligation for me to do this. Did you have a question back there? Yes, sir.
You know, I wonder how you feel about the fact Governor Gavin Newsom has joined your effort in a sense. He wants to have a convention of states not to accomplish any of the purposes you outlined, but rather to cut back on gun rights and to allow states to pass reasonable gun laws. We all know what that means. You say that we've never accomplished anything these days, but it wasn't that long ago that Heller didn't exist, and we didn't have an individual right to bear arms. Now we do. Then McDonald comes along and applies to the states. Now Bruin comes along and has the best possible way to interpret the Constitution, and we're winning cases all over the country. As soon as we have a convention of states, we're going to have more school shootings, we're going to have more pressure on people, and there's going to be a pushback, and there's going to be some result. And the thought that the people who came up with the modern push for this convention of states, that you can control it. You can't control this at all. That we didn't control the Annapolis Convention that led to the Constitution, repealed the Articles of Confederation. I appreciate the frustration. I agree with every criticism you have of government. But the Constitution, the words of the Constitution are not the problem. The heart of the people running the country are the problem. Yes. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you for your question. Let me see if I can answer them, and if I don't, I'll certainly look up the answers and get them for you. But in the pamphlet I gave you there is, I kept a copy here so I can remember what all I put in there. You'll see something in there that actually says conventional disinformation. What you cited about the runaway convention, how they changed the Articles of Confederation, is a misfact, right? The convention follows the call. The first call for convention was by Virginia. And if you read the call for the convention that Virginia put out there, it's in this document I gave you here, it expressly says, do what you need to do to change the Articles of Confederation to make it work for this country. They realized that the Articles of Confederation were too constrained and would not work for the type of government our founders wanted. It wasn't a runaway convention, because it wasn't until the 5th state that came out there and wanted to do this, put out something about not changing that. But the thing is, you follow the first call. The first call was issued by, again, the state of Virginia. And the orders for their commissioners were, make it work. And there was a change for that. I see you're shaking your head, but I invite you to go ahead and read up on it and see what's there. There's a lot of opposition.
Can I say on the way out, if anyone wants it, I've been working on this issue for 40 years trying to oppose this, for 30 years.
Yes, sir.
And if anyone wants it, the other side of the argument, the door issue so anyway, I appreciate your enthusiasm for the country. I just think you have a terribly dangerous solution.
Well, a lot of people say it's a dangerous solution, but would you rather do nothing and stay the status quo? That's what I would say. I won't do that. I refuse to do that. Just a second. I refuse to do that, and many other people won't either, because what's happened so far just hasn't worked. All right? We find ourselves today, whether you realize it or not, as Josh said here, they've gotten a foothold already with totalitarianism in this country. You would like to believe that perhaps where you're seeing it is only with their trying to squash a candidate, take away my right to vote for whoever I deem to be out there who's an eligible person. They want to take that away from me because they're afraid of what it's going to be, because it's how they're running the country right now. They're afraid of that. They deem those of us who are conservatives as to be the danger to this country. I am not a danger to this country. I'm a defender of what we believe in. All right? So I won't sit down idly and not do anything. I will use the words. I'd ask you, what are you afraid of? The words in the Constitution that says or. Because just like Congress has the right and the power to amend the Constitution, so do we. It was in there for a person. It was George Mason from here. And you know, George Mason didn't sign that document when he was done. Man of principle. You know why? He didn't have the Bill of Rights. It didn't have what was written in Virginia. And that's a lot of what the documents of Virginia was used to write our Constitution and the Declaration of Independence. They didn't do that by accident. They had divine guidance in what they were doing. I've got over there the Founder's Bible. I want you to remember one thing. That book right there was the guiding principles that they used. That book over there was what helped write this one. And I will believe what's in there and what's in here, and that's what I'll fight for. So I'll challenge anybody that has that. We'll listen to our arguments. But I question again, what are you afraid of in using the words that are in our Constitution that gives me and you the right to amend the Constitution to stop what's going on in Washington, D.C. today? Right? What you have to understand, and what the left and the Democrats don't understand, is right in front of their face too. I've had this argument with my sister. My whole family is on that side except for me, right? But I challenge them. I look at them and says, do you not realize that they're doing it to you too? They've decided you will not have a primary. They've decided who your candidate will be, and they've told you who you're going to vote for. Where else does that happen? Where else does that happen? In countries where the people don't have a right. The first thing they're going to do, like you say, we talk about the Second Amendment for a second there. The first thing they want to do is try to change those rules. You said Newsom is looking for a convention of states. There's over 400 calls for a convention of states on single articles. Many states still have an active one in their legislatures calling for a balanced budget. It's still on the books. But you can't get it done unless you have at least 34 states with same, identical, or similar language to get that passed in Congress. There's no movement to do that. Everybody's doing it individually. There's been over 400 calls. None of them have ever succeeded. We're trying to make that happen. Because believe it or not, today is 1776 2.0. And I can either fight to save this country using the Constitution, or we can go back to the way they did it for the War of Independence. I prefer the first method, and that's why I'm going to keep doing that. Any other questions? Yes, sir. Well, you were first.
I run a little group called Foundation, which is about 67 of us, so I'm quite on board with you. What I see, guys, is most people, we can come here, we can listen to this, or are we actually going to be out there and do that? So every Monday night, and I would love to have you come and speak. We have a wake-up and Chester thing coming up at FCRC in Millwood. But this is exactly what we need to do, guys. I mean, it's not coming to something like this and going, okay, that sounds really good. My guys come to your convention of states. Okay, there's 3 or 4 of them that go there, and that's one of the things. We would love to have you, I'd like to talk to you, have you come to our presentation, and be able to do that for us, but guys, we know how to do this. You know, that's exactly where we are, and I appreciate you very much. Thank you.
I've got one here, and then I'll come to you, Josh. Unless you tell me to quit.
Yeah, my point is, I love this idea of people taking control of their futures. I think that's a great idea. And I think there's people on both sides of the aisle that would agree that we don't need lifetime politicians. And I think you would get leftists to support that, far rightists to support that, center and mass to support it. And we're spending way too much money. You know, are those the two big bullets that the nation of states are pushing? That we need to limit the amount of time. I mean, I've always joked. I said, hey, if you elect me to Congress, I'm staying there forever because everyone kisses your butt. You're the best guy in the world. You know, and you're making money. And you're like, why would I leave this?
Right.
I understand the human nature of it, but you know, clearly that was not the intent in the past, but now people are living to 90 and they're staying in Congress tonight. So, you know, and it's on the right end or it's strong firm. I mean, they have real on that. So is that the two big bullets that you guys are really looking?
Right. Well, you have the term limits, and keep in mind, like exactly what you said. I've had to work with a lot of them over a long time, and they expect you to bow down when they walk in a room. They get comfortable with what they're doing, and what happens is they get to the point where they know better than us, right? And so they dictate. You feel it every day in your organization, your businesses, the regulations that come down and guide what you're supposed to do. That we can't use gas stoves anymore. We can't do this, can't do that. That's what happens. They know better than us. And about having those term limits, think about it. We showed those people that were up here on this one, but I look at it this way. Let's look at AOC and the rest of those folks that are here. I question why they're even in there in the first place, because you swear the oath of office. I've taken 3 of them, and they don't expire, right? To defend the Constitution of the United States, and what are you supposed to do? It guarantees a Republican form of government and protection against invasion. Neither one is there. So if you're a Democrat, a social democrat, or totalitarian, how did you get into Congress and put your hand on that Bible to sign, to pledge an oath to protect a Republican form of government when everything you're doing is try to destroy that, right? So when I talk about term limits, I also look at it from an aspect, because they've been reelected already. They've already been reelected. So yes, that's one of the things, aside from the debt and everything else.
You get the majority, you could pull 100 Americans together in a room and ask them 2 questions, and the large majority, no matter what their political stance, would agree. Yeah, no one should be in Congress for 50 years, and yeah, we're spending way too much money.
Convention of States is nonpartisan. This issues that we talk about here affect every individual. Josh.
I'm just curious about the mechanism, kind of thinking about a little bit about what Mr. Olson's kind of heard. In other words, but a terrible scenario, let's say you get 34 states. Once the 34 states agree, is that forever? In other words, does that Convention of States power then stay forever because they've all now passed it? And it's anytime those states can get together and put something in, or is it we have to do it and we get this one thing done and then you got to do it all over again? I'm just curious how that mechanism.
Well, here's how it goes. Our opposition mainly lies, well, we've got opposition on both sides of the aisle, to tell you the truth, but John Birch Society is a big one, Eagle Forum, the rest of them, and they argue those same kind of points. It's going to run away this and the other. First of all, when you get that 34 states, the federal government is obligated to call the time and a place, right? Their function is administrative in nature. And if they drag their feet and decide, well, you can have that 5 years from now, we don't need them. The states called it, the states can have that convention. The federal government has no role in a convention of the states. They have no role. Once the convention happens and you're done, you're done. And if you're going to do another one of those things again, you'd go through the same process of getting 34 states to call a convention. Here's the thing. Antonin Scalia is used by John Birch Society to say that he said the Convention of States was a bad idea not to do that. Not true. They didn't read his whole statement. What he actually said was, I'd like to see it done at least once. And I really don't care too much about why, as long as there's something valid to do it. He says, if you do it once, it will show the federal government that we, the people, have the power, that we will decide ultimately how things proceed for our country to make it happen. You just need to do it once. And it doesn't really matter whether or not an amendment gets approved out of this. What it does is show the government that the people, the states, and our representatives can hold the federal government accountable. They have no power other than that was derived from us. The government doesn't create anything. They don't do anything. They put out these statistics on job creators. They didn't create squat. You did. Their regulations either allow you to move forward or not. They look for more ways to restrict our businesses from doing business and taxing you to death more than any other country out in the world here right now. So the whole idea behind the convention is to show the government, again, that we the people gave you the power. You staying in Congress for 20, 30 years makes you believe that you have the power, and you're wrong. In fact, this president stood in front of a joint session of Congress, looked into the cameras, and declared that the government is the people. Many people don't remember that, but he said that. The very first National Prayer Day, he never uttered the word God. Think about that. The leader of this country believes that they are the people, that they have ultimate control and ultimate say here. We're in troubled times. You've seen it. So I choose to fight. I choose to use the tools that our founding fathers gave us to try to educate people why you need to be involved at the local level, at the state level, in your government and in what's going on. You need to be involved. Was there another question out here? I'll just tell you, this is my obligation. It's what I do. I've been in the service of my country since forever. As a Navy person and as an officer with the Central Intelligence Agency, I spent over 12 years, like I said, there, in and out of Afghanistan and Iraq, because I believed in what we were doing. And when I got to the point where there's a firefight going on, when I was working on a mountaintop in Afghanistan, I said, you know what, it's a younger man's game. I was already in my 40s when I went out there. Somebody else has got to do it. Started my own company, hired myself out, got hired right out to do the same thing again. There I was, back in Afghanistan. But it's what I believe in. It's what I do. And this is my obligation. My obligation is to go out there and speak when people want me to speak, to continue to support those states that have already passed and try to help states that haven't passed there get there. And like you said, sir, don't know if it's going to work. There's no guarantees, right? None guarantees whatsoever. However, the duty is mine. The duty is yours. And the results belong to God. Proverbs 27:17 says, as iron sharpens iron, so does one person sharpen another. That's why we get together. We're here to sharpen each other. You in your business world and us in trying to save this country and to have people more involved and get back into what's important in life, to save some sort of legacy for our children, our grandchildren, and their children. I mean, I'm definitely want to be one of those people that says, at least I tried to do something, and I won't let it go down. So thank you for your time. I'd be happy to talk with any of you over here. I've got petitions over here that you can sign. I'd love for you to be able to do that. And there's books here if you'd like to take some photos of the books so that you can add them to your library. Education is key. Go ahead and do that. Thank you, sir.